Ladies and gentlemen, we often hear of black excellence in this country, but when it comes to the EFF, the only excellence that they are really keen on is Russian excellence, but not South African excellence. So this is a in the nation, State of the Nation response. Lloyd Shivambu, the favorite fat boy of the EFF, came out with his solution on how to solve load shedding. And apparently it involves a 710 billion rand nuclear power station from the Russians, and 200 billion for one whole stage of load shedding in power ships. What do you think of this, Shimon?
No, I think it's pretty great that the party that bangs on about black excellence and Africanism and African culture and African skill, and if the whites just left, we would build a utopia by ourselves. They want nothing more than the whites from Russia to come in and save them from the issues that they have created in the first place. Ironically enough, what you see is the EFF saying that the Russians can save load shedding through nuclear reactors. And we actually agree with this. We think nuclear reactors are the best thing since sliced bread. Low carbon, very green, and you'll have electricity for 1,000 years. And the Russians are very good at building them, so we're not against that particular notion. The problem with the EFF is that they've all got PhDs in sort of political philosophy about why the national anthem is racist, but they don't understand basic maths. 1 trillion rand to solve the load shedding crisis is what they are offering. The problem is, in the real world, where money doesn't grow on trees for socialism, we can't afford that as a country.
And I don't actually know of many first world countries that could afford that to fix an economy. 1 trillion to fix an economy. It's ridiculous, mate. And let's face it, we also know the states of South Africa, right? 1 trillion rand. Imagine that in a state of disaster. Everybody would be like, hey, time to eat. Do you remember the days of Thabo Mbeki? Everything that he used to kind of push forward was like African solutions for African problems. And now we've got like, you know how we solve these problems? Yeah, we go to Russia.
What is interesting though, and this is slightly off topic, have you noticed how much the EFF love Russia? They specifically say a nuclear reactor from Russia. David Mabuza went to Russia for medical care. A lot of people like Russia, including the ANC. So I'm wondering, what is the Russian influence on the politics of South Africa? Because these are very expensive projects that we can't afford, but yet the EFF and the ANC are talking about Russia as if it is a friend of this particular country. So in the back of your mind, Byron, do you think perhaps Russia is looking to have a bit of influence in South Africa and is using the ANC and EFF to basically do its bidding?
Yeah, so there's two actual answers to this, genuine answers. And the first is obviously the ANC traces its, should we say, its liberation struggle to the Russians, because obviously it was the Russian commies who basically sent them AK-47s to fight the liberation struggle. And so they still feel that they owe a debt of gratitude to the commies in Russia. They also still are under the mistaken idea that Russia is a commie country. The Communist Party in Russia is very much gone, guys. I know you still hop onto your national democratic revolution from the commie days, but communism's like dead in Russia. It's now got a very much free market enterprise there and an economy that has been opened up to Western principles. Arguably, so has the Chinese economy. I mean, obviously in recent times it's been clamped down and it's becoming less communist. Whilst there is still a central command structure in China, the economy was largely liberalized. With that being said, I think they still feel that these entities are commie, and their obviously defining ideology is socialism/communism. So they're like, why not partner with them? Because, they're friends of me because we all believe in the same stuff, even though they don't. The other answer is obviously Russia has a controlling, or should we say an owning stake in mines in South Africa. So they do have an interest in South Africa's natural resources. And those resources are now needed more than ever before because of the blockades on Russia and the sanctions on them following the Russian-Ukraine invasion. So I think that they do need to exert some form of dominance on South Africa in order to not find their supply chain squeezed. This is now becoming let's call it a little bit of a parasitical relationship. Interestingly enough, that's the very thing that these parties used to accuse Western nations of wanting from South Africa, right? Stealing the resources.
And the reason I asked that particular question was because we can see that the entire grift of the ANC and the EFF is precisely this, right? They talk about black nationalism, they talk about African solutions to African problems, they talk about solving things themselves, they talk about localization of industries and a variety of other things. The EFF hate local whites, but they'll gladly go to Russia for help, which undermines the essential ideology of the entire political system for these political parties. Because we know that if they are the butlers and the gardeners and the domestic workers of the Russian Federation, they're not acting for the interests of South Africa. They're acting for the interests of imperialist powers, in their own words, of a foreign state. Interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, so you may recall that last year I did a video around Julius Malema basically calling for those revolution to get violent. And in that video, I did actually say that there is a comment that you often hear in socialist circles, and that is the attack against whiteness. And as I said in that video at the time, there is no real attack against white people as such in terms of the racial classification. It's actually what whiteness represents. And what whiteness typically tends to represent is obviously that of capitalism. So what exactly is it that they're fighting against? It's against capitalism as a whole. And they seem to think that if they partner with these countries that have a defining characteristic of central command, that they will better be in the company of their friends in order to be able to exert central command in this country. I don't really think that's true anymore, is it?
No, it's certainly not, because if you look at Russia and the Russian ideology and political culture, it's all about traditional Western values. It's about the autonomy of the church. It's about morality. It's about making sure that, the Western notions of, LGBTQI rights and calling people by their pronouns, that doesn't exist in Russia. It's clamped down because they do understand that destabilizes the nation. So you got this sort of traditional Western society that is using these African countries as pawns to extend its own influence. And we can understand that. That's called geopolitics. But it's weird for these so-called black nationalist parties to be very willing participants in this without realizing that whatever they accuse the DA of doing in terms of being Western imperialists, they're doing exactly the same to themselves. The difference is the DA has never been nationalist, whereas these parties have.
100%. And the greatest irony here is that the only solution that we really have in order to defeat colonialism, whether it be from the West or from the East, is actually the solution offered by Thabo Mbeki, which is African solutions for African problems.